Hi, Shep Hyken here, excited for another look backstage with another all-access pass to the 50-year history of Contemporary Productions with Steve Shankman. Now, Steve, there were a lot of people in your life, a lot of people that helped you, a lot of people that mentored you, and some idols, people you really respected.
Well, you know, it's just when you go back and think about the stories we're going to do, this is one of my favorites. So how did it all begin as far as me and the promoting company? What happened is I'm playing on a show, August 4th, 1968 at the Old Kiel Auditorium, which is now Scottrade. I'm up on stage with the Impact Soul Review. We're opening for the Temptations. Now, unfortunately, recently we lost Dennis Edwards. Dennis became the replacement for David Ruffin. It happened the night after that show. That was David Ruffin's last show. But I'm getting to that story because the promoter of that show was Regal Sports. Now, Regal Sports was owned by several people, but the main person I dealt with was Everett Agnew Sr. Then the name Regal Sports was around since the 50s. And they got that name because the guys that farmed this company were walking down a street in Memphis and they saw a street named Regal. They said, this would be a great name. I never understood sports because they really didn't do any of the fights or sports. They really did mostly concerts. Anyway, Everett Agnew was definitely my mentor. After that show, we started the company. And I went to Everett. I said, maybe, I always call him Mr. Agnew, maybe you want to invest in our shows. He says, Steve, I really don't know your business. And I know that's true because a year prior to that, he called me and he said, Steve, I have a chance to do this show, and it's a group called the Creams. He says, there's a guy in there, Ginger Beckerman and Eric Clapper. I said, you mean Eric Clapton and Ginger Beck? He couldn't pronounce the names because this was not the kind of stuff he was doing. He was rhythm and blues and actually big bands in the earlier days. He was one of my favorite people of all time and will remain that way. Another one would be Frank Barcelona. We talked about him. He really gave Irv our start with Premier Talent, which was the main agency back in those days. Bill Graham, we've talked about. If it wasn't for him at Arrowhead Stadium with the Stones, Irv and I would have taken a $100,000 plus. But even locally in St. Louis, there were a couple of guys. If I don't mention them, I would be wrong because if it wasn't for Shelley Grafman and Richard Miller, we maybe not be here today. For example, Richard Miller, I met him when I was 18. He collected a lot of jazz records, and I love jazz. And even though they weren't playing them on KXLW, he gave me those records I could take home. But he was always there for good advice. And one instance, I remember I had a deal with Harry Arnest at the arena. He came in and saved the blues. And Harry, we made a deal right away, which was if we do a certain amount of concerts, we want some sort of a rebate deal. And you know, you don't have to include the acts because here's the thing, if we don't make that deal, the acts should pay the full rent. And if we do make the deal, why should I have to pay anybody back the money? It comes back to us. That was our justification. Unfortunately, when it came time to get paid, Harry says, I don't remember that deal. So I called Richard Miller because I'm frantic. And Richard Miller tells me something I'll never forget to this day. You may have a bad deal with a good person, but you'll never have a good deal with a bad person. And I learned it that day. Now we talk about last, but certainly not least, Shelley Grafman. Shelley made radio in St. Louis, and without Shelley Grafman's support when we managed Head East back in the early 70s, when he added them to the playlist, which once you add an act to a Shelley playlist at KSHE, the whole country adds it. And then he also was so good to us with concerts. I mean, he would put up in the Jocks room, and he would tell those guys, John Hewlett and Joe Mason, push this show, push this show, push this show. He'd actually bring the act on and do their own radio program to help promote. So these are the guys in the business that really helped make Contemporary what it was.
Wow, you had some great people to work with and mentor you, so to speak. Well, I hope you enjoyed this backstage story. Come back next week for another all-access look into the history of Contemporary Productions.